Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News, and today we have Professor Kirpal Singh, who's going to talk about his new book, Naked Ape, Naked Boss. And Kirpal, please tell us more about your inspiration behind this book and why Naked Ape, Naked Boss.
Okay, so about 4.5 years ago, Marshall Cavendish began a conversation with me. And the idea was to try and launch a series of books that would capture the colorful personalities, either in Singapore or around Singapore or even further afield, who have made a difference in the lives of people around them. And, there were a lot of big names that came to mind, Nelson Mandela and Barack Obama and those kind of people. But we thought that those guys already have a lot of people writing their stories. So we thought that nearer home, it might be nice to pick on a couple of individuals to tell their story. And we tossed around quite a few names, and we finally thought that Bernard Harrison might be a name that a lot of people recognize, at least in Singapore. A lot of people recognize around the world, especially in the arenas of zoos, night safaris, those kinds of, tourist attractions and all of that. And once that was settled, once we agreed that we're going to do this first book on this guy, Bernard Harrison, then we began thinking about titles, right? So first we thought it would just be Bernard Harrison by Kirpal Singh, just that. Then we thought that's a bit boring, that's pretty normal, straightforward. We were thinking, and then of course we thought, it was Bernard that had this big, fanfare about Aming, and every Singaporean knew about Aming, right? Breakfast with Aming and that kind of thing. So we thought, wow, that's an ape. And in the zoo, the ape enclosure, the big one, was actually conceived and planned by this guy. So we thought, apes, what would Bernard and Aming have in common? And so we thought, yeah, maybe nudity, because Bernard, in his private life at home, is usually just wraps around a kind of sarong and walks around it, right? And an ape basically is naked. Got fur, but basically naked. So we thought about it, and then we thought, okay, so The Naked Ape is the title of an old book by Desmond Morris, right? The Naked Ape. So we thought it might be interesting to use that memory and tie it in with the idea of being boss. Because really what this book is about management styles, the ideology that governs the CEO of an organization. You know what I mean? That is the main thrust of the book. All right? So layered in the book, there are many messages that go around. That, for example, how do Singaporeans look at bosses? All right, we know how they look at apes, all right? But how do you look at a boss who is naked? Meaning, this is a boss that believes in sharing decision-making processes, believes in being upfront with you, where he likes you, where he doesn't like you, those kinds of things. It's a management doctrine, it's a management style that in Singapore is still very, very, very controversial. Because most Singaporeans are not very used to it, they're not very comfortable with it, and certainly a lot of Singaporean bosses are not ready to be naked just yet. They like to keep their cards close to their chest, and essentially this is what the whole book is about. Because the world woke up one day about 12, 13 years ago, and this was reported all around the world, that Singapore's excellent zoo director, one of the most highly respected directors of zoos in the world, Bernard Harrison, had quit his job. He just resigned, almost at the peak of his career. So why would a man want to do that? And it became very clear to those people who knew, and slowly became clear to others, those who had no clue, that essentially it was a clash. It's a very common clash, a clash between the CEO of an organization and the chairman of his board. All right? So in management theory, this is one of those classic examples that if the chairman of the board and the CEO don't get on, usually the CEO walks away. Because very rarely is the board going to, upset his own members and kick out his own chair, right? But it's the manner by which, the person leaves and the details of the leaving that are, I think, of the essence. And for that, I think readers will have to read this book to find out what exactly happened. Because the same CEO that worked under one or two other bosses and worked okay. So sometimes I think it is not just a question of simple personality, but it's about two very strong personalities, both believing they are right and refusing to agree to work in a harmonious kind of way, or one saying, but if you don't like what I'm telling you to do, then you know where the door is. And somebody says, well, you can eat humble pie and say, all right, I'm not ready to walk out of the door just yet, so I'll work with you. And some other people say, well, if that's the way you feel, then I'm actually using that door. Thank you very much for showing me the way. And I'm walking out. And so Bernard walked out. But, his walking out was struck around the world because zoos were thinking, because he really transformed the Singapore Zoo. The Singapore Zoo was Bernard's life. That's what I'm trying to say. He was so committed to it. He was so dedicated to it. The chairman of the board, that looked after the Singapore Zoo, later on the wildlife reserves and all of that, they come and go. You know what I mean? But he, as a CEO, had given his whole life to the zoo. Right? The moment he graduated, that was his first, and really, in a way, his last job. Until today, he has got no other job. Now he just goes around the world advising governments what to do, how to plan night safaris. Because don't forget, our night safari in Singapore was the first night safari in the world. And he was a man that basically made that possible. He made that happen. Okay? So we got Naked 8, Naked Boss, and then Bernard Harrison, the man behind the Singapore Zoo, and the world's first night safari. And you can see he's as naked as possibly can be on the cover without upsetting too many, persons' ideas of what is okay on a cover or what is not okay on a cover. Yeah.
What are the challenges in writing this book?
Well, I think the challenges in writing a book like this, which is basically bandied around as a biography, it's not a biography in the usual sense of the word. There is a kind of chronology that I follow, but a biography means you're really talking about every single aspect of the subject, all that. I take a very different view. I thought that the best way to do this would be to have Bernard tell me in his own words as much as possible about his own life, his attitudes, his values, his philosophy, and all of that. So in a sense, I see this book as a kind of partnership between my subject and myself. And I am the interventionist. I ask what I think are appropriate questions, and he responds with what he thinks might be appropriate responses. So it took us about 2.5 years of many meetings, interviews, starting with interviews in Singapore. He then moved to Bali, where he lives now. So I flew to Bali 3-4 times to have interviews with him. And then whenever he would pass through Singapore, I'd try to catch him and say, hey, what do you think of this? Or are you okay with this? And then some of the work was also done through emails, especially in terms of sensitive issues. I wanted to be sure that when I quoted him, it was exactly as he wanted it. So that's how the thing came. The challenge is to try to represent your subject in an honest, fresh, engageable kind of way, because some people will say, why do I need to read a book about Bernard Harrison? I know enough about him from the magazines, the media and newspaper. So I say, well, you have to read, because what you get in the media at one level, but there is a Bernard Harrison behind the public persona. There's another Bernard Harrison that is the husband, the father, the lover, the friend, the generous spirit, the tough, exacting taskmaster, the boss, the adopted father by some people, the provider for, some children who nobody else wants to adopt. So he says, come, my child, let me give you some food, that kind of thing. So he encapsulates that kind of generosity of spirit and everything we associate with what I think being positively human means. So the way he brought up his kids is very radical. The way he interacted with his staff from junior to senior, very radical. Like he would carry, the feed to the animals in the zoo alongside the guy who's actually the feeder at the zoo. You know what I mean? Because he said, even though I'm the CEO, I need to show them that the work they do, I need to do too. And maybe then I can experience what they're experiencing. If it's painful, like carrying a heavy pail, or if it's muddy and dirty, you're going to meet the animals, or if it's dangerous, those kind of things. So he believed in that. He didn't put himself up and say, I'm the boss, therefore you listen to me. There were occasions when, obviously, if an employee tried to say, Bernard's position has been, if an employee, a subordinate, says, I think it's better to do it this way, let him try it. Instead of saying, no, I know best, let him try it. Let him or her try a new way. And maybe he'll turn out to be better. And if you're secure in your own position, then this is not going to upset you. In fact, you're going to be happy, like saying, wow, my guy has found a new way of, climbing a tree or feeding a monkey, you see? That kind of thing. Most bosses are saying, ooh, I felt embarrassed. Like, my guy below me, sort of came up with this new way of doing things, obviously people think I'm stupid, right? I'm the boss and I can't come up with the idea, but he comes up with the idea. So rather than taking pride in having a good person working for you, a lot of bosses get a bit nervous, like, oh, you think you're trying to show the world you're better than me? That's the way out. I don't want you anymore. So there are a lot of insecurities of people who are in high positions. So this is actually a book that I hope, by using a very dramatic case and a very provocative case. I mean, Bernard, he's been a model, all right? He modeled for clothes and all that kind of thing. He's a bit of a ladies' man, self-confessed, very well known. So I cover his initial, lady connections and relationships, all of that. But also a person who is very dedicated to conservation, world-renowned as being one of the leading champions of conservation long before the so-called green movement and this climate sustainability, green earth movement, long before they came about. He was already into conservation, those kinds of things. So I thought it'd be very nice to share this story, his story, in his own words and with my interventions with people. Yeah.
Now, what kind of dynamics do you see for Singapore in the next 5 years? Because, as you said, Bernard Harrison has actually set an example, a headway for local Singaporeans and also individuals in the Far East in terms of human rights and freedoms that they can find themselves.
Right.
Do you see the behavior of Singaporeans and the behavior of the Far East Asians being transformed and looking forward,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me reiterate this by saying that if you ask a Singaporean who's fairly informed and quite well educated and aware of what goes on around him or her, and saying, name me one person you associate with the Singapore Zoo, chances are even today, right, 12, 13 years after Bernard left the zoo, people still say Bernard Harrison. I mean, after Bernard Harrison, there have been 2 or 3 zoo directors. But I can't even remember their names. I can't recall the names. I can't tell you, Robin, after Bernard Harrison, it was, this guy, this guy, this guy. Because they have not made the kind of impact. They have been there basically to just literally manage. They don't, they haven't crossed new barriers. They haven't, provided new parameters and all that. So I think going forward, his story suggests 2 things. One, if you are a person dedicated to something and you have a passion for that, you need to be creative, you need to use your imagination to carve out and chart a career path which is going to be very good for all those who are working for you and with you to make whatever that thing is successful. A university, for example, say SMU, a new university, a new bank, a new retail shop, whatever it is. And the second thing is, the world is not going to wait for you to change. It keeps changing by itself almost. And the momentum of change is hectic today. So what Bernard was saying and might have seemed radical 20 years ago, today is like passé, it's like, what was the big deal? Do you know what I mean? And I think as Singapore learns to become a global city with global institutions, global organizations here, then not only simple rights of workers and rights of human beings, but I think the whole way in which people treat each other in a work-life situation has to change. It has to undergo a process by which honesty has to be much more significant than before. People want more transparency. If somebody comes up to you and says, boss, what are we doing tomorrow? And the boss says, sorry, none of your business. That guy is going away feeling very, very disappointed Because what's he going to do? He'd probably go into a corner and sulk. You know what I mean? Probably go home and beat his wife or something. I don't know what he might do, right? But if the boss says, tomorrow, when I haven't actually thought that far, what do you think we should do tomorrow? That's another way of handling the question, isn't it? So then the employee feels, hey, my boss wants me to be a participant in the making of tomorrow. And people get very excited by it. I think the old idea that so long as you give people money, they'll just do everything. I mean, that works up to a point, but it doesn't arouse passion. Do you know what I mean? But if you say, I'm really not sure what I'm going to do tomorrow, but let's sit down and discuss. You want to have beer, let's talk about this. What's your view? What can we do tomorrow? How can you make this institution bigger? How can you help me? I need your help, Robin. Now, when a boss says that kind of a thing, you feel very involved and you feel like, oh my God, this guy is really taking me seriously. He wants me to be a partner in the journey rather than just a slave in the journey, just doing his bidding. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way the world is going to go. I think that's the way Singapore is going to go.
Now, speaking about the way Singapore is going to go along with the Southeast Asian countries, what advice would you give? Because there's a huge shortage of labor. There's a high turnover of labor, especially from the lower skill positions like the cleaners, the F&B industry for waiters and cooks and chefs. What advice can you give? 3 key points for human resource executives, as well as the management, senior management, on recruiting these people and retaining them.
That's right.
Could you give us some advice?
Yeah, sure. I think part of the situation is that recruiting labor is easier than retaining them. Because there are a lot of people around Singapore, around the world, who have no jobs. And they need the money to feed their families. So there are a lot of people out there headhunting, recruiting, and all of that. The point is, when I have been recruited and I'm now in Singapore and working for you, in whichever area, construction industry, retail industry, hospitality, whatever, I will, of course, be doing what I need to do because I need the money. But I will also be grudging if I don't find that you're respecting me, that you're not recognizing the dignity of my life, that you don't treat me as a fellow human being, you treat me purely like a robot